I think it's a rite of passage for every YouTuber to make a video deep diving into the TV show Friends at some point, and I am no exception. Friends is actually my current autistic hyperfixation. I've always known Friends was a thing that existed, this TV show that was really popular a few decades ago and ran for a really long time, but I had no interest in it because I was never that interested in TV shows or sitcoms until a couple of years ago. But I went on a trip recently and I watched a few Friends reruns on the TV, and that's when I fell in love with the writing. The dialogue is so my style, with the dramatics and miscommunications and the witty back and forth and the surprises and secrets being revealed and how melodramatic everyone acts about it. It's really my style of writing and totally how I wrote when I was in high school. But I watched a few episodes on TV, and I didn't think that much about the episodes when I went home and for the next few weeks. I ended up watching a few YouTube video essays talking about the overall plots and themes of Friends and going into character studies before I actually watched the show. So basically every single thing was spoiled for me before I watched the show, and that's personally my taste. I like knowing things are gonna end well or how certain things end, especially because there is a will they or won't they slow burn that lasts 10 seasons, and there's no way I would have been able to stand it had I not known how things ended. So, spoiler alert, there will be spoilers going through the rest of this video. My necklace is stuck. Ugh. I bet that sounded awful against the microphone. Anyways, so Friends is a sitcom that ran from 1994 to 2004, and it's about 6 friends who are in their mid-20s, living their lives and doing things in Manhattan. That's basically it. It's literally just about 6 Americans doing American things in their mid-20s. There are 6 characters. It's an ensemble production with the 6 characters all getting their own stories and backgrounds and plots. So the first character is Phoebe. She is unpredictable with a traumatic backstory that she brings up from time to time for comedic effect. Then there's Joey. He's the ladies' man with a failing acting career and 10 collective brain cells that he loses one by one with each episode until he is a blithering man-child with the brain of an 8-year-old by the final season. There's Chandler. I wrote in my notes Chandler and I read Chandelier. There's Chandler. He's the comedian who makes jokes when he feels awkward, so he makes jokes all the time because he always feels awkward, and the show is very on the nose about this coping mechanism. There's Ross. He's a nerd. He's a paleontologist. He has mantrums every now and then when he doesn't get his way. There's Monica, who is Ross's sister. She's a control freak, and she's very competitive. And then there is Rachel, who is kind of I don't know, I'm not saying that the show is from her perspective, but I feel like out of all the characters, she gets the most character development, and her appearance or her emergence in the friend group is kind of what starts the show. Rachel is Monica's childhood best friend and a girly girl who does fashion, and she's a little bit spoiled. So yeah, this is the cast of Friends. Now, let's get into basically the plot, and then I will tell you my controversial opinions about Friends. Yeah, I don't know if I made it clear, but this video is specifically about my controversial opinions about Friends. You can find so many better video essays analyzing the plot of Friends, going through the plot, breaking it down, breaking down the characters. I wanted to give my controversial opinions because these are things that I don't see other people talking about, because I think that most people don't agree with my opinions. And feel free in the comments to share if you agree with my takes or not. Okay, so the overarching plot of Friends is this will they or won't they between Ross and Rachel. Ross has been in love with Rachel since he was about 15 and she was maybe 13 or 14 because she's his sister's best friend, so they've always been around each other. And it isn't until, I would say seasons 1 through 3 really focus on Ross and Rachel's relationship and back and forth, where Rachel is oblivious to Ross's advances until she's not, but then he's dating someone else, and it goes back and forth like that for the first 3 seasons. By seasons 4 and 5, they take a bit of a back seat as the relationship between Monica and Chandler is explored, other 2 members of the friend group. And then Ross and Rachel's relationship is kind of focused on again by seasons 9 and 10 when they have a child out of wedlock together. So, now that you know the important parts of the plot, let's get into my controversial takes on Friends. Okay, so my first controversial opinion is simply titled Ross. Ross is probably the most controversial character in Friends because he's written to be a relatable loser kind of guy where everything bad always happens to him. He's sort of like the grown-up version of Greg Heffley from Diary of a Wimpy Kid. And the newer audience of Friends, the Zoomers, seem to really hate Ross because he's a toxic, possessive cheater, or at least that's how younger audiences see him. Actually, slight tangent. I'm friends with a lot of millennials, and I found that the reception for Friends is really split between the people between 35 and 45 love Friends, and the people between 25 and 35 hate Friends and find it really cringe. And then I don't even fall into that category because I'm younger than the 2 demographics I just described, and I love Friends. But anyways, and also my theory behind that is I think Friends was really enjoyed by the older millennials, and it was so overhyped and just a different style of media that younger millennials weren't used to as much, so they found the laugh track kind of tacky, and they found the lack of any action in the show probably boring, so they found the show really overhyped and kind of annoying. But that's just my take on why millennials are so split with the reception of Friends. Anyways, okay, so Ross. The opinion on Ross seems to be overwhelmingly that he's a toxic, horrible person. I don't think he is. I do agree with his portrayal as just a pathetic loser whom nothing good ever happens to. And I kind of want to go through his 3 major relationships in the show, and I will get into the we were on a break thing in a moment, but I first want to talk about Ross and Carol. So Ross enters the show as a recently divorced guy whose wife left him for a woman, and his wife's name is Carol, and I just want to start by saying Carol is a horrible person. The implication is that she always knew she was a lesbian, yet she still dated Ross for 4 years, and then married him, and then stayed married to him for 3 years, and then ended up having a kid with him, which I will speak on in a second. So, like, if you already knew you were a lesbian, you should not date and marry a man. You should definitely not marry a man. You should definitely not marry somebody you're not attracted to. It doesn't sound like any adults in her life pushed her to marry him, and there is kind of an implication that Carol's parents are not accepting of her sexuality, but that doesn't mean she should have brought an innocent party into this to have her parents accept this. I don't think that, just because it's difficult for her to be accepted in a world that is not receptive to her sexuality, especially because this was the 90s, it doesn't mean she should have married a guy. She just ended up making his life more difficult by having him go through a divorce and then having a kid with him. So either she always knew she was a lesbian and she's just kind of a gross person for marrying someone she was never attracted to, or she was bisexual and she is fulfilling the negative stereotype of bisexuals who always cheat. The thing is, if she knew she was a lesbian or knew she was into women, she should have just ended things with Ross But she didn't do that. She was a coward, and she cheated on Ross, and then eventually left him when she realized that this thing with a woman was actually going to go somewhere. So Ross was always her safety blanket as she explored things with other women, which again makes Carol a terrible person. What also makes Carol a terrible person is that she and Ross have a child together, and Carol effectively pushes Ross out of his son's life. He seems to only get his son Ben once a week, and considering the fact that he is a very loving dad and there's nothing abusive about him, and the reason they divorced was because of infidelity and her not being honest about her sexuality, because of that, that's not a reason why he shouldn't get 50% custody of Ben. He should get 50% custody of Ben. For the first few years of his life, Ben barely knows Ross because Ross is like this babysitter who just sees Ben for a day once a week. And Carol's new wife, Susan, is also pretty gross. She and Ross both have this kind of competitive resentment because Ross was with Carol and Susan is now with Carol, and Ross seems to think that their lesbianism was a choice. But Carol is the real bad guy here, in my opinion. She also doesn't let Ross put his last name on Ben's birth certificate, even though he is Ross's and Carol's son. Instead, Carol puts her last name and her new wife's last name on the birth certificate, even though Susan had nothing to do with the birth of Ben. So I think Carol is a terrible person and leaves Ross very damaged for future relationships. By season 2, Ross and Rachel begin dating, and by season 3, we start seeing issues in his relationship with Rachel. Rachel starts working at a much better job. She is given a better job by this man she meets at a cafe named Mark. Ross instantly becomes jealous of Mark, and he also becomes annoyed by how much time Rachel is spending at her new job and how much time she isn't spending with him. So at this point, Ross is totally painted to be the bad guy by most audiences now. He's seen as being toxic and controlling and possessive by being suspicious of Rachel's relationship with this man named Mark, who gave her job. But I actually think Ross has lots of reason to be suspicious of this guy, Mark. Mark is totally making advances on Rachel, knowing that she has a boyfriend, and he seems to have this strategy of trying to get her to see that Ross isn't good enough for her, and he can treat her so much better than Ross can. And I think Rachel is disrespectful to Ross for how much time she spends with Mark as a friend outside work, even though Ross has made it clear that he thinks Mark has ulterior motives and he's uncomfortable with how much time the two of them are spending together. I think if you're in a relationship with somebody and you start spending a lot of time with a different person who has a crush on you, and your partner expresses that he's uncomfortable with how much time you're spending with this new person who has a crush on you, I think the respectful thing to do is to stop seeing this person, and definitely to stop seeing this person alone, because it's not as if Rachel and Mark had an established friendship. He's just a stranger who met her and pretty much instantly started hitting on her and making advances toward her, which is why he gives her her job in the first place. Yes, she earned her job because she was qualified, but she did get that job offered in the first place. She did initially get that opportunity because a guy was into her. And then very shortly after Ross and Rachel break up, Mark finally makes his move on Rachel and admits that he has liked her the entire time. So Ross was right to be suspicious. Now, the problem is how Ross handles it. Instead of communicating to Rachel, hey, it seems clear that this guy has a crush on you. I'm uncomfortable with how much time you're spending alone with him, because it seems to me that you're giving him the impression that even though you're dating me, you don't mind him getting closer to you and he's still kind of an option to you. I think he should have communicated that like an adult. Instead, Ross starts embarrassing Rachel by sending her extravagant gifts at work and showing up to her work and being kind of obnoxious and flirtatious and disruptive, all to kind of show off to Mark, or kind of rub it in Mark's face, that Rachel has a boyfriend and her boyfriend is me, not you, ha. And it just comes across as really immature, and Rachel expresses multiple times that she doesn't like that, and it's really cringe and embarrassing and unattractive. Ross also has an issue with how much time Rachel is spending at work. Ross is definitely more of a hopeless romantic, and he is already in season 2, he and Rachel have a little bit of a spat where Ross tells her that he has a dream of the two of them having a couple of kids together and getting married and living in the country somewhere in a specific city. And he already has their names picked out, and Rachel is kind of freaked out because she hasn't been in love with him as long as he's been in love with her. So he isn't like the dream that she's been dreaming about for a decade. He's some guy who was her friend that she's been dating for a few weeks, and she's a little bit intimidated and freaked out by the fact that he has their entire lives planned out together. So between the two of them, Rachel is more focused on the moment. Right now, she has a really good job, and she wants to do better at this job. Ross wants a future between the two of them, where the two of them have a traditional kind of marriage. Well, okay, I mean, they might both be working. I mean, like, traditional marriage where they're married, they have kids, they live in a white picket fence house, and Rachel isn't thinking ahead to that. So Ross and Rachel they're kind of on different pages with what they want. And Ross is very clingy and wants to spend more time with Rachel. Rachel does not want to quit her job for Ross, and the two of them end up raising their voices, and Ross brings up Mark. And Rachel snaps and says that the two of them need a break. And here is where the word isn't exactly scientifically defined. A break seems to be different from a breakup, but Ross interprets it as a breakup, and Rachel isn't exactly clear what she means by a break. Well, no one has ever told me that we were on a break, but I would interpret break to mean that we're gonna stop acting like a couple for an extended amount of time, but that we are going to get back together. So our relationship is kind of paused, and then when it comes to are we allowed to see other people, that doesn't seem to be very clear. But the night that Ross and Rachel break up, or go on their break, Ross ends up sleeping with someone else. And I think it's disrespectful to get with somebody. So number one, I think it's disrespectful to get with somebody else so quickly after a breakup. And number two, I don't think that sleeping with a stranger is a good way to cope with the breakup or make yourself get over somebody. So in that sense, I think Ross was in the wrong. But I don't think that Ross cheated. I don't think he and Rachel were in a position where they could cheat on each other. Rachel thinks he cheated. I do think what Ross did was wrong, and I think he thought what he did was wrong too, because when Rachel asks to be his girlfriend again less than a day later, he immediately accepts and then tries to hide the fact that he was sleeping with another woman the night that they broke up. And I think he should have owned up to it. He almost was going to own up to it, but then he had some advice from his even more immature guy friends in the group, and they said to keep it a secret, and he made the mistake of listening to them. So when Rachel finds out, she sees it as cheating, and she officially breaks up with Ross, and they remain officially broken up for the rest of the series, except for like 2 days when they get back together after a few months. Another thing I forgot to mention is that while Ross was suspicious of Mark and Rachel thought it was unreasonable for Ross to be so jealous of Mark, Ross ends up going on a play date with, a stripper who he met at a bachelor party or something, but he ends up going on a play date with her and her kid because she's a single mom, and his kid, and Rachel is all like, why are you spending time alone with this woman? And he's like, because she has a kid and I have a kid and our kids are playing with each other. And I think Rachel had even less grounds to be jealous, and it's also ironic for her to act like Ross isn't allowed to do that when she is allowed to go on lunch dates with this guy who has a crush on her, who isn't her boyfriend. But yeah, I think both Rachel and Ross were pretty toxic, and they both have this jealous possessiveness going on where neither of them are okay with each other dating other people, yet they have too much pride to get back together and make their relationship work. I think that I have pity on anybody who dated Ross and Rachel in between them not being together and being together, because it's clear that each other is their end goal, and nothing could work out long term with anyone else because both Ross and Rachel were still emotionally attached to each other, even when they were mad at each other. Alright, so finally, Ross's relationship with Emily. Emily is the second person he marries. Emily is this English girl who kind of comes out of nowhere, and she has a very unpleasant welcome to America. She's supposed to go out on a girls' night with Rachel, but Rachel, slights her, I guess, and makes Ross go with her instead. And then when Ross hangs out with her, he ends up having a lovely time with her, and the two of them begin dating really, really quickly and then get married within 6 weeks of knowing each other. Now, people either hate Emily or they make her 100% the victim, and I think both are incorrect. I don't think there's any good reason to hate Emily. I think initially she has a negative impression of the friends, and, the friends being the ensemble characters of the show, like the main ensemble. It makes sense that if whoever doesn't like the friends, the audience doesn't like them. But if you think about it, the six friends in this group are all kind of selfish and mean to each other. They're constantly getting into fights. They're constantly causing drama with each other, and they seem to care more about themselves than each other. And they're also just very elitist. Like, they're just so awful to the other people who aren't in their friend group. Like, they're in their own little cult. So I totally understand why Emily would not like Ross's friends, and that's not a reason to hate Emily. Another thing is, after Ross and sorry, I almost said her name wrong too. After Ross and Emily get married on their wedding day, when they're about to say I do, Ross says Rachel's name instead of Emily, and it suggests, well, the heavy implication is that he still has feelings for Rachel and wants to ultimately end up with Rachel, not Emily. Ross also, throughout the relationship with Emily, seems to not love her as much as he loves himself with her, because he's very insecure and nerdy, and she makes him more spontaneous and confident, and he loves that. He loves feeling that way around her, not so much herself. But Emily is also kind of dumb. She is also clearly somebody who moves too fast in a relationship, and I think that's why she and Ross seem to have such explosive chemistry from the beginning, because both of them, they wanted to spend as much time together as possible, and so they did spend as much time together as possible, and they're like, this is grounds for a marriage, and they attempted to get married way too quickly. But anyways, after Ross accidentally says Rachel's name, Emily kind of disappears for a few days, and then when she finally gets back into contact with Ross, it's because she still has lingering feelings for him, but their grounds for a relationship is based on the fact that Emily doesn't want Ross to talk to Rachel ever again. And I think that's totally reasonable, because Ross and Rachel have such history, and they're clearly always going to choose each other over anybody else. If Rachel's, to be fair, Rachel tells Ross that she still has feelings for him, and Ross says, well, I married Emily now, but I'm flattered that you would think that. But ultimately, Ross always chooses Rachel over anybody else. Rachel says she doesn't want him to date, he doesn't date. Rachel says she wants to get back together, they get back together. So anybody with Ross is ultimately doomed. Anybody with Ross who isn't Rachel is ultimately doomed. And even Rachel with Ross was doomed. But anyways, Emily deserved better. She was dumb, but there's really no grounds to hate her, and she doesn't really do anything wrong in the show except for trying to make things work with a man who's emotionally unavailable. So that's Ross. I don't think Ross is a horrible person. I don't think he's a bad guy. I think he's a typical kind of, selfish, insecure, can't really hold himself accountable guy who has been dealt a lot of bad luck in his life. So that's Ross. My second controversial opinion is Richard is too old for Monica. So the second most dramatic couple in the series is Monica and Chandler, but before Monica dates Chandler, she has a serious relationship with Richard, who is her former ophthalmologist and who is a close friend of her dad. So he is 21 years older than her, and they start dating when Monica is 27 and he's 48, so it's not predatory, but I think it's weird and uncomfortable that Richard is into Monica even though he watched her grow up as a child. So I think Richard is a bit of a weirdo for that. I also struggle to find their relationship cute. He just looks, I think the actor's name is Tom Selleck. and he's like supposedly this aging hottie or whatever. I don't relate, I don't see it, but whatever. But anyways, I can't find the relationship cute. It just makes me too uncomfortable. He genuinely does feel like a dad to her. But he is also, he's all, like, I lose so much, okay, sorry, I can't finish my sentence. Toward the end of his relationship with Monica, I finally did start respecting their relationship because it did seem like they deeply cared about each other and had something really healthy going on. But I lose so much respect for Richard when, after he breaks up with Monica, he still has feelings for her, and when he reunites with her, and he knows she's in a serious relationship with a new guy, he tries to talk her out of being with this new guy and offers to marry her and have kids with her. And the reason Richard and Monica broke up is because Richard didn't want to have any more kids, which makes sense because he was already 48 and he would be really, really old by the time his kids graduated from college. He wouldn't be around for their weddings. He probably wouldn't be around for his second set of grandkids with her. So it makes sense that he wouldn't want to have kids, but he's so obsessed with Monica and can't let her go that he eventually changes his mind and wants to get back together with her. And I just think it's so gross of him to be like, I'm still in love with you, please marry me, and then he's all like, I will leave, but you have to promise me that Chandler can give you everything that I can, otherwise I won't leave. And it's just weird and gross and immature, and I lose a ton of respect for Richard by the end. But yeah, he just feels way too old for her, and I don't like him. Okay. My next controversial opinion is pretty simple. I like Janice. Janice is Chandler's ex-girlfriend before Monica, and she looks exactly like Amy Winehouse, and that's kind of the only reason I like her, because I think she's hot, and therefore I like Janice. I don't like Janice and Chandler together, but I love when Janice shows up in every season from time to time, kind of scaring everybody, and being like, oh my gosh. Sorry, I don't want to take God's name in vain. Okay, my next unpopular opinion. Monica and Chandler are kind of toxic. They're heralded as the healthy relationship in the seasons, compared to Rachel and Ross, who are constantly fighting, and, you know, Ross and Rachel are kind of universally recognized as a toxic relationship, but Monica and Chandler, they have some spats, they yell at each other from time to time, but they always make up, they always reconcile their differences. But the thing is, they're both very different, and Chandler is such a man-child. Monica basically has to teach him how to have a healthy relationship while the two of them are together. Chandler is also still threatened by Richard, even though Monica immediately loses, like, Monica's done with Richard. She's over Richard. She doesn't feel an interest in getting back together with him when she meets him again while she and Chandler are dating. She loves Chandler. She's not threatened by his fear of commitment. She is great. But Chandler is the one who's always insecure. He's insecure about other guys flirting with her, and yet he still forgets that he has a girlfriend and is constantly checking out women or acting interested when his other two guy friends are talking about a single available woman. And then he's like, oh, right, yeah, I have a girlfriend, and she doesn't like it when I do that. Or he's constantly bringing up his exes, and he just is really emotionally immature compared to Monica, which to me makes sense why she would be more interested in somebody like Richard. Monica, being in her late 20s, is at the age where it's not, I don't think it's weird for her to be interested in guys 10 to 20 years older than her. But yeah, Monica and Chandler just have a lot of fights and a lot of miscommunications and are a little bit too quick to assume the worst in each other, which I know is part of what makes a sitcom, but I do feel like Chandler and Monica are way more toxic than the fandom is willing to admit. This is my fourth or fifth, I forgot. Okay, my next unpopular opinion is Phoebe should have ended up with David, not Mike. So Phoebe is the quirky, unpredictable girl who doesn't really fit in with the rest of the friend group, and by the end of the series, she starts dating and ends up marrying a guy named Mike, and in my opinion, this happened way too quickly. She literally meets Mike because Joey sets her up on a blind date with somebody named Mike, and Joey doesn't know a Mike. So he walks into a cafe, yells the name Mike, and the first stranger who answers to Mike, he brings that man on a blind date with Phoebe. And then Mike and Phoebe hit it off pretty quickly, but we don't really see it. We don't really see their chemistry develop. We don't really see why Mike likes Phoebe so much. Mike is a little bit weird himself, but he's nothing compared to Phoebe, and he doesn't really compliment her at all. He and Phoebe just don't really fit together, in my opinion. His normalness, like, he's not so normal that he calms her weirdness or compliments her weirdness, but he's not weird enough to match her energy. So his relationship with Phoebe just makes no sense to me. Also, they break up when Mike says he never wants to get married again because he's been divorced and his wife was extremely abusive. And then out of nowhere, he suddenly decides he wants to get married to Phoebe, and they get back together. And again, the character development just doesn't make any sense. And the relationship between Phoebe and Mike is way too short and way too forced. Now, throughout most of the seasons, Phoebe has kind of this on-off, long-distance relationship with a science guy she met named David. I don't even remember how she met David, but she and this nerdy guy named David meet and bond really, really quickly. And then it turns out that David is moving to Minsk for science experiments, and he has no intention of ever coming back. But he returns to America from time to time, and then he and Phoebe occasionally have one passionate night together before he has to go back to Russia. By the end of the season, he finally returns and begins living in America again, but Phoebe is still not over Mike. So when she and David start going out and David wants to propose to her and she is planning on saying yes, her attention is diverted when Mike says he wants to marry her. And to me, I found David and Phoebe a better couple. I felt like their energy matched each other. They were more of an opposites attract kind of dynamic, and they had a lot of love and care for each other. And I thought it was really inspiring how, by no personal relating of my own, I thought it was inspiring how they were able to keep their relationship going even though they lived on other sides of the world and weren't really able to call each other, it seems like. So yeah, in my opinion, Phoebe and Mike don't make sense, and Phoebe should have ended up with David. I know there are a number of people who thought Phoebe should end up with Joey because Monica ends up with Chandler and Ross ends up with Rachel, but Phoebe and Joey have a very, very sibling relationship. It just wouldn't work. Okay, my final unpopular opinion is I think the shipping between... I think Joey and Rachel should have been taken more seriously. Nobody liked the Joey-Rachel falling in love with each other storyline, not even the characters playing Joey and Rachel, and I think that's why the relationship was never taken seriously. Jennifer Aniston, who plays Rachel, stresses that Rachel's crush on Joey is only physical and she's not actually in love with him, whereas Joey seems to be crazy about Rachel, but neither character wanted Joey and Rachel to end up together, so the writers go out of their way to make sure that Joey and Rachel never even sleep with each other, which is ironic because the show seems to stress that there's nothing wrong with random people sleeping together randomly right and left, but if it's Joey and Rachel, it can just never happen because that would ruin their dynamic. Some people think that Joey developing feelings for Rachel comes out of nowhere and doesn't fit his character, and while that's kind of true, I disagree. I do think it kind of comes out of nowhere, but developing feelings for a friend kind of happen like that. They do kind of come out of nowhere, and they start slow, and then they eventually eat away at you, and suddenly the friendship is ruined, and it just happens because you're close to this person who's attractive, and then over time, you start seeing them more romantically than platonically. And I do think that that is something very realistic that could have happened between Joey and Rachel, especially when the two of them go on a fake date together and practice flirting with each other, and then Joey starts catching feelings afterwards. And then, kind of again, out of nowhere, Rachel begins developing feelings for Joey. As they spend more time together, she sees different sides of him. They live together for a little bit in his apartment. It again makes sense that she would, or I wouldn't say makes sense, but again, it's totally believable that she might develop feelings for Joey at some point. And I think the only reason it doesn't work is because the actors didn't want it to happen, so the actors weren't putting their all into it. But I think had the writers and actors taken Joey and Rachel seriously, their relationship and their conflict could have been more believable and more enjoyable in the show. I just think, like, not letting them sleep with each other was kind of silly and also a bit unrealistic, so I don't know, that's just my opinion on that. So yeah, those are my unpopular opinions about Friends. Let me know if you agree. Let me know if you have any unpopular opinions about Friends. Let me know if there are specific lore behind all these decisions that the writers made that you might know about that I don't. So yeah, I hope all the 35-year-olds enjoyed this video. Bye, I love you.